Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 11 must-start players for the 2022 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, we're going to be talking about 5 fantasy prospects that going into this week have risen in my rankings a considerable margin in comparison to where I had them on Tuesday and Wednesday's rankings videos. We're going to be talking about 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a singular defense that going into our Week 11 matchups are must-starts. Now, besides me just telling you that, I'll share with you guys my opinions and the statistics that justify the reasons as to why we want to play these players. Of course, some of these circumstances is me just going back, doing more research. Others are current injuries that have taken place to their teammates that will increase their value going into this weekend's games. After we conclude the must-start players on screen, then we'll transition into talking about some prize pick entries for this upcoming weekend, in which I'll also be including a couple prize pick entries that are must-start players. Not even the ones that I'm mentioning on screen today, but other players that I wasn't able to include, some guys that in my opinion are automatic plays via prize pick, but are also automatic plays for our fantasy teams going into this upcoming weekend. They both collide and have themselves a lot of upside going into this weekend. Again, for those of you who haven't checked out PrizePicks, there's a link down in the description of the video. When you sign up today and use promo code Andrew, make a first-time deposit, you'll be given a first-time deposit match that is immediately doubled up to $100. So again, if you deposit 20, you'll be given 20. If you deposit 50, you'll be given 50. You can go ahead, make some entries for this upcoming weekend. So be sure to go ahead, listen to that section for a couple other potential must-start players going into Week 11, because the entire purpose is to try to help you guys win this upcoming weekend's matchups and get into our fantasy football playoffs in just a couple weeks. Okay, let's get into this, shall we? Beginning with our must-start players for Week 11. The number one is, of course, Kadarius Toney, the thumbnail for today's video. Kadarius Toney, over the course of the last couple of days, has risen in my rankings, mainly because of the injuries that have been sustained by his teammates. Mecole Hardman is going to the injured reserve. That is going to close him out for 4 weeks, gone. Juju Smith-Schuster is going to be missing this week after, of course, he sustained a concussion last week, wasn't able to clear protocol. That all being said, there is so much opportunity that is available for Kadarius Toney, who right now is only being started in 45% of Yahoo leagues. In my mind, is an automatic play, especially considering the fact that he's coming off of a week in which he only played 44% of the offensive snaps for the Kansas City Chiefs against the Jaguars. He only played 28 snaps, ran 17 routes, and still had himself 17 fantasy points, 5 targets, 4 receptions, 57 receiving yards, and a touchdown, 2 attempts for 33 rushing yards. A lot of utilization in which they used Mecole Hardman in the past has been kind of now been attributed to Kadarius Toney, and we've seen the streak that Mecole Hardman was on prior to his injury, and with Juju Smith-Schuster out, there's even more opportunity at hand. And let's go ahead and quantify exactly what kind of numbers we're talking about in terms of opportunity. In the last 3 games that Juju Smith-Schuster and Mecole Hardman have played together, healthy, weeks 6 through 9, 3 games, they have totaled 42 targets between the two for 35 receptions, 478 receiving yards, 5 receiving touchdowns, 2 rushing attempts for 28 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, and 110.1 fantasy points. On a per-game average in the last 3 games that they have played together, they are averaging a combined 14 targets, 12 receptions, 168 total yards, 2.34 touchdowns per game, and 36.7 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. That level of opportunity is now available for Kansas City Chiefs wide receivers, and primarily Kadarius Toney, as we know that Marquez Valdes-Scantling is going to be playing this week and at a full capacity, hopefully, but if he is not, due to the illness that he has sustained and of course has kept him limited throughout practice this week, there could be even more chances for Kadarius Toney to be the number 1 primary option in a match of this upcoming weekend, Sunday Night Football, as they take on a division rival in the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, besides the fact that there is a boatload of opportunity, we're talking about being associated with Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes, one of the best NFL quarterbacks, but as of right now, in terms of red zone production, Patrick Mahomes leads all quarterbacks in the National Football League. And this is something that I specifically wanted to talk about, because this is exactly where Kadarius Toney is going to separate himself in terms of fantasy point production this upcoming weekend. Patrick Mahomes leads all quarterbacks in the National Football League right now in terms of red zone passing attempts, completions, passing yards, passing touchdowns, inside the 20 and inside the 10-yard line. Overall, when they get down into the red zone, it's all about Patrick Mahomes passing the ball, not running the ball with, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jerick McKinnon, or Isiah Pacheco in weeks past, but instead passing it to guys like Mecole Hardman, Juju Smith-Schuster, and of course, Travis Kelce. But with 2 of those 3 missing this week, Kadarius Toney, just like last week, should be able to find the end zone once again in a perfect position to succeed in a fantastic matchup. All right, let's move on and let's begin talking about, yes, this same matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers, but on the other side of the ball, on the other offense, we have Mike Williams, who should be returning and back. Currently, he's only being started in 27% of leagues, and I believe he's an automatic must start for these potential reasons. This week, he obviously participated in 3 consecutive practices. Wednesday and Thursday were limited, but Friday, as of today, he was at a full capacity, and even was quoted to say to Bridget Condon of the NFL Network that I should be out there in regards to this upcoming weekend's game against the Kansas City Chiefs. So if in fact he's confident that he's going to be out there, he practiced full today, I mean, why not go ahead and start up Mike Williams in an extremely advantageous matchup? And I'll tell you why this is an advantageous matchup. Besides the fact that the Kansas City Chiefs are allowing 31.47 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format to opposing wide receivers thus far this season on average. That is 21 targets, 14 receptions, 166 receiving yards, and 1.3 touchdowns per game that they are allowing this season already. Besides that, we've also seen wide receivers dominate against this defense as of late. Of course, Christian Kirk, 9 catches, 105 and a touchdown. Zay Jones, 8 catches, 68. Ayuk, 7 catches for 82. McLeod in that same game, 4 catches, 65 and a touchdown. Stephon Diggs, 10 catches, 148 and a touchdown. Gabriel Davis in the same game, 3 catches, 74 and a touchdown. I mean, those are just the last 3 recent games. I mean, I'm not just exaggerating here. These are incredible performances that we have seen from wide receivers, and it doesn't even stop there. You go back to week 5, Devontae Adams, 3 catches, 124, 2 touchdowns. Mike Evans in week 4, 8 catches, 103 and 2 touchdowns. Everyone dominated against this defense, especially number 1 outside elite wide receivers, which in my mind, Mike Williams is. In 3 of his last 4 performances against the Kansas City Chiefs, he has produced more than 19.8 fantasy points. In 3 out of the last 4 games that he's played against them. I mean, those performances even include earlier this season, in which he put up an incredible performance on Thursday night against the Kansas City Chiefs, in which he scored a touchdown and was an incredible 100-plus yard game. Mike Williams back on track this week should be a fantastic play for all of those reasons and even more. Moving on, let's talk about another player within this offense, which is Isiah Pacheco, running back of the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I did mention this in just a couple moments ago in regards to Kadarius Toney and the fact that Patrick Mahomes thus far this season leads all quarterbacks in terms of red zone passing statistics, whether it's passing completions, attempts, yardage, touchdowns. I mean, there's a reason why the Kansas City Chiefs lead the National Football League with 25 passing touchdowns, while other teams are nowhere close to them. And yes, they're on the bottom half of the conversation in terms of rushing touchdowns. They've only had 8 of those this season. Obviously, not all of them coming from the running back position, as we have seen McCole Hardman and as well Patrick Mahomes run the ball. So they're not really giving too many opportunities in terms of red zone touchdowns to their running backs. But I truly do believe this is a week where Isiah Pacheco is not only going to have a grand total of opportunity because of the absence of a Juju Smith-Schuster and McCole Hardman, but he is going to potentially find the end zone because of the matchup on hand against the Los Angeles Chargers run-stop defense that, in my opinion, cannot stop a soul. Now, of course, Isiah Pacheco is gaining this confidence from me because of the performance that we saw this last week. And even though he fumbled, he still was given the majority of touches, as we saw both Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jerick McKinnon not have any rushing attempts in this game. Clyde Edwards-Helaire literally only played 4 offensive snaps, just to put it in perspective. While Isiah Pacheco played 56% of the offensive snaps, 35 total, 16 attempts for 82 yards, a 5.1 yard per carry average. But when I went back and I watched the film from this last weekend's game against the Jacksonville Jaguars, it gave me even more confidence. And even though the Jacksonville Jaguars, they're not a great run-stopping defense, they played relatively well in some scenarios, but ultimately, they could not stop Isiah Pacheco. He really did, in my mind, look like a version of Dameon Pierce that wasn't as fine-tuned. Yes, he was able to get yardage, but after contact, that was where he was flourishing. Of his 82 total rushing yards, 59 of them came after contact. That's a 3.69 yard per carry average after contact. That in itself is an incredible number that, if you can continue to sustain with even bigger runs throughout the week, could be in a fantastic position. Now, of his 16 total rushing attempts, 11 of them consisted of 4 or more rushing yards, while only 5 of them consisted of less than 4 rushing yards. When 2/3 of your overall opportunities are successful on a downly basis, and he didn't have a singular negative rushing opportunity in that game, leads me to believe that he's going to have himself another great week here, especially considering the fact that the Los Angeles Chargers are giving up 19.94 fantasy points per game alone in terms of rushing statistics to opposing running backs. I'm not even talking about receiving yards or receiving statistics, because I don't even expect Isiah Pacheco to get any of that with Jerick McKinnon active. I'm just talking about rushing statistics alone. The Los Angeles Chargers this year have given up 209 rushing attempts for 1,195 rushing yards. That's a 5.72 yard per carry average, and they've also allowed 10 rushing touchdowns in 9 games. That's 133 rushing yards per game and 1.11 rushing touchdowns per game to opposing running backs. Now, if you want to talk about some of the recent performances against running backs, let's go to Week 10, San Francisco. The combined duo of Elijah Mitchell and Christian McCaffrey combined for 32 attempts, 127 and a touchdown. McCaffrey went for 15.7, Mitchell went for 9.3. Let's go to Week 9, Atlanta. 30 rushing attempts for 177 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. Patterson, 17.8, Algier, 12.8. All right, let's go to Week 7. Prior to the bye week for the Los Angeles Chargers, they played against Seattle. They gave up 29 rushing attempts for 202 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, 28.7 fantasy points to Kenneth Walker. All right, let's go back to week 5. Let's talk about Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt as they combined for 28 rushing attempts, 181 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Of course, Nick Chubb, 25.4 fantasy points, while Kareem Hunt, 13.2. Not only is this defense giving up a lot of yardage and a lot of statistics to primary running backs, but even backup running backs within these offenses are dominating in terms of the rushing game and gaining yardage and gaining touchdowns. This is an automatic play in my eyes. A player that is only being started in 28% of leagues at this current moment in time, Isiah Pacheco, an automatic play as the starter of the Kansas City Chiefs backfield. Let's move on to David Montgomery, the other running back that I wanted to mention on today's video. Due to the fact that he has Khalil Herbert now out and on the injured reserve, this opens up so much opportunity for David Montgomery to be a fantastic fantasy option. And there's a reason why on Tuesday's rankings video, I specifically mentioned, guys, if you have an opportunity to potentially trade for David Montgomery at this moment in time, you should absolutely do so. And I honestly still hold that opinion because in the next 4 weeks, we're going to see David Montgomery get back to what he has pretty much been known for, being the primary number 1 back who is not only getting his rushing attempts, but also getting receiving work and dominating as such. Just to put this in perspective, when we look at the last 4 games that the Chicago Bears have participated in, against Detroit, Miami, Dallas, and New England, the running backs for the Chicago Bears have combined for 103 rushing attempts for 432 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 8 targets, 6 catches, 62 yards, which again, isn't great in terms of receiving production, 1 receiving touchdown, and 68.4 total fantasy points as a running back room, whether it was Ebner, whether it was Khalil Herbert, whether it was David Montgomery. Overall, yes, they're not going to get a lot of targets because Justin Fields is running the ball, but in terms of rushing attempts, it's certainly been there at about 25 per game over the last 4 weeks. And I don't expect that to slow down. Now, when we look at what exactly David Montgomery has contributed to that 103 total rushing attempts, 53 of them came from David Montgomery. So he's only getting about 50% of those total opportunities, and he's only been able to get 1 of those 2 total rushing touchdowns in the last 4 weeks. So if he's pretty much playing majority of the snaps, he's going to get himself a significant boost in terms of his rushing upside because the attempts and the opportunities are going to be there. By all means, we have to play him, especially considering he takes on the Atlanta Falcons. And I understand the rushing touchdown potential is decreased because of Justin Fields and his utilization down in the red zone, his ability to make plays, whether it's scrambles or designed runs. But as of right now, we're looking at an opportunity here against the Atlanta Falcons, who in the last 4 games, they themselves have been dominated by opposing running backs. I mean, we're talking about the Carolina Panthers, who had 42 rushing attempts for 167 yards and a touchdown against them. Dante Foreman in that singular game, 19.0 fantasy points. The Los Angeles Chargers, 22 rushing attempts for 88 yards and a touchdown. Eckler in that game, 20.6 fantasy points. Carolina, a couple weeks ago prior to that, 31.8 fantasy points from Foreman as that team totaled for 146 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. And even before that, a simple normal week from Joe Mixon of 16.6 half PPR fantasy points, 18 carries, 58 yards, and a touchdown. There is so much potential upside within this matchup. David Montgomery must be started in this week's game with Khalil Herbert out. He's currently being started in 78% of leagues. I'd like to see that number at 100%. Obviously, it's a pipe dream, but I'd like to see it there going into this upcoming weekend's matchups against the Atlanta Falcons defense. All right, let's go ahead and include our must-start players in terms of on-screen right here with the Washington Commanders defense. We're going to talk about their defense in specific because I truly do believe that the Washington Commanders, you know what, to be honest, this may even encompass the entire Washington Commanders because we're going to talk about Brian Robinson in the PrizePicks section in just a moment, but let's just talk about their defense currently. The current Washington Commanders defense is being started in 51% of leagues. Again, 50-50. We had them in my Monday waiver wire episode after the Baltimore Ravens and New York Jets. So if you have an opportunity of potentially picking them up and playing them, I think they're a great streaming option as a defense. And I'll tell you primarily why. The Houston Texans in their last 4 games have allowed to opposing, fantasy defenses 10 points, 9 points, 8 points, 9 points. Those were against the Raiders, Titans, Eagles, and Giants. Now, again, those aren't the greatest defenses in the National Football League in terms of fantasy points scored defensively, because usually those are the Patriots, the Jets, and of course the Cowboys, who have been in that top conversation for majority of the season. So when we're able to see lesser defenses in some sort of capacity have upside weeks because of the fact that they're taking on the Houston Texans, why not go ahead and play the Washington Commanders defense, who since week 1 has been averaging 8.3 fantasy points per game on average against opposing offenses. So why not go ahead and play them this week when they have an incredible opportunity of taking on the Houston Texans offense? We know that the Washington Commanders have been incredible in terms of stopping the run, and where the Houston Texans pretty much thrive and are able to move the ball is through Dameon Pierce, where if they're able to stop him, Davis Mills may make some mistakes. Get after the quarterback. Again, in the last 3 weeks, Davis Mills has been sacked 3 times, and 4 times this most recent week. A lot of opportunity there for fantasy point production. Pretty good option as a must-start going into this week. All right, now that we've covered all that, let's transition into talking about some more must-start players via PrizePicks as we approach Week 11 of the 2022 fantasy football season. Let's check that out right now. All right, so as you can see to the right of me, we are here via PrizePicks. Again, if you guys haven't checked them out already, there's a link down in the description. When you sign up today using promo code Andrew, your first-time deposit will be doubled up to $100. Again, if you deposit 20, you'll be given 20. If you deposit 100, you'll be given 100. You can go ahead, make some entries, win some prizes for those of you who are interested. Again, we have a lot of potential PrizePicks that, in my opinion, are extremely valuable going into this week in terms of entries. I've done a little bit of research and hopefully we can go ahead and take advantage of it right now. So first and foremost, I want to go ahead and put in an entry for the 3 primary players that we talked about that are currently available via PrizePicks. First one being Kadarius Toney. Okay, so we'll go ahead and type in Kadarius Toney. We're going to add him to the list. 50.5 receiving yards. I believe that's going to be an automatic over. Who's the next player that I wanted to talk about? David Montgomery. Okay, David Montgomery available here. 61.5 rushing yards. We're taking the more on that. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about the final option, which is Isiah Pacheco. Okay, we're going to go ahead and click that. So at this current moment in time, we see that Kadarius Toney, we're going to pick more on him, along with David Montgomery, along with Isiah Pacheco. I am very confident about this potential play this weekend. Again, even though yardage hasn't always been there for these players. When we're talking about Pacheco going up against the Los Angeles Chargers defense, I mean, again, they cannot stop the run. We have talked about this ad nauseum over the last couple weeks, giving up 100+ rushing yards in consecutive weeks for pretty much the entirety of the season. Kadarius Toney is going to get his opportunity in the receiving game, and we're certainly going to see David Montgomery on the ground with no Khalil Herbert dominate probably 70 to 80% of the total rushing attempts in this game, which is close to probably 20 attempts by the end of the game against the Atlanta Falcons. We're going to go ahead and place this entry. If you want, you can go ahead and potentially do a flex play, where if you get 3 correct, you 2.5 times your money. And if you only get 2 correct, you go 1.5 times. But at this moment, I'm going to do the power play where I 5x my overall contribution. And that's exactly what we're going to do, placing this overall entry going into this week. Now, the next string of players are going to be the ones that, in my mind, are must-start players in their own capacity. First and foremost, we want to talk about Brian Robinson. Like I was mentioning when I was talking about the Washington Commanders, Brian Robinson has an incredible opportunity against the Houston Texans as of this week, and I'll specifically tell you what exactly I'm feeling in terms of his overall production, with 63.5 rushing yards being his current number. The Houston Texans have allowed to starting running backs since week 1. Barkley 152, Sanders 93, Henry 219, Jacobs 143, Etienne 71, Eckler 60, Herbert 157, Javonte Williams 75, Taylor 161. There has quite literally only been 1 week this season, since week 1, that they have allowed a running back to produce less than 63.5 yards on the ground. That was Austin Eckler, which we know, again, within that offense, he's getting majority of his work through the air. And when we're talking about Brian Robinson, a guy who's coming off of a career-high 26 rushing attempts, should be in a perfect position to go more on this given number. Now, another player that in my mind was Paris Campbell. Paris Campbell at this current moment in time at 36.5 receiving yards is an automatic play in my eyes. In the last 3 games that he has played with Matt Ryan as a starting quarterback, his receiving numbers, 76, 70, and 57. An automatic play, and I'm picking more on that given number as well. Let's talk about another player that I love to talk about. It is Dalton Schultz. His current number of 41.5 receiving yards is by far and away, in my opinion, the easiest number for this given week. In all 4 games that Dalton Schultz has played with Dak Prescott, even week 1 where Dak Prescott left that game in the 4th quarter, in all 4 games, he's been able to surpass this number. 44, 49, 74, and 54. Automatic more play in my eyes going into this week. So with all these 3 compiled together, we're going to go ahead and place this entry as well. And the final entry that I wanted to make going into this weekend, even though there is a lot of them, and again, you can go ahead and talk about passing touchdowns, rushing yards, receiving yards, total receive. I mean, there's so many players to potentially go after. But specifically, I want to talk about Jaylen Warren. Jaylen Warren, who as of late has been able to accomplish this number of 13.5 receiving yards in 4 out of his last 5 games. And with Mike Tomlin coming out earlier this week and saying Najee Harris has knee discomfort and there's a potential where, we may see more Jaylen Warren, well, then by all means, I'm fully believing in that idea. We're going to go ahead, pick more on his given number going into this weekend. And the last player that I wanted to mention is someone who I currently have as my number 1 quarterback going into this week, and for the rest of the season is in a very valuable conversation. It is exactly Justin Fields. So let's talk about Justin Fields in specific. Justin Fields has a lot of numbers this weekend. Of course, 71.5 rushing yards looks enticing, especially considering the fact that, my goodness, he's been able to do it in a lot of weeks as of late. But I specifically want to focus on fantasy points scored. As of the last 2 weeks, Justin Fields has been putting up unbelievable numbers, 40.39 and 42.72 fantasy points. And of course, in the last 4 consecutive weeks has surpassed this number. When we're talking about going up against the Atlanta Falcons defense, who just a couple weeks ago, obviously not even in that weather game, PJ Walker was able to dominate against his defense and find himself a lot of production. I think with Justin Fields having 320 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns in the last 2 games alone, those rushing yards are going to be enough to be able to get him to this next level. I think that's an automatic play there. So we'll go ahead. We'll take him and Jaylen Warren. We'll make another one of these entries going into this week. And that's pretty much going to cover it here. Again, if you guys haven't checked out PrizePicks yet, be sure to do so today down in the description of the video. I am very confident in this upcoming weekend's entries. Really excited about them. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's content. If you did, be sure to click the like button down below. If you have not yet already, be sure to subscribe. We're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2022 season. Tomorrow, 1 to 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, I'll be live streaming here on the channel, answering questions in terms of starter sits going into week 11. Sunday morning, we'll have up-to-date rankings on screen available from 8 to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for all 4 primary positions, talking about my top 36 running backs, wide receivers, top 16 quarterbacks, and tight ends. And of course, we'll be mentioning our top 10 kickers and defenses over the course of that stream. So if you need help setting your lineups, be sure to join us on Sunday morning from 8 to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Until then, everybody, thank you everybody for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.